Welcome. I'd like to call this hearing to order. Welcome everybody to this hearing of Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee. Perhaps more than any other appreciates the attention to military trucks and utility vehicles. It might not be glamorous, but as some other weapon systems, but it is essential, and certainly we need that mobility in anything we do as a service. I'd like to welcome the members who are joining us today remotely. I have to read this script, but hopefully we're not going to have to do it too many more times. Members who are participating remotely must be visible on screen for the purposes of identifying, verification, establishing, maintaining a quorum. Participating in proceedings and voting. Remote attending members must continue to use the software's platform video function the entire time while in attendance, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render them unable to participate on camera. If a member experiences technical difficulties, they should contact the committee staff for assistance. Video of the members' participation will be broadcasted via internet feed. Members participating remotely must seek recognition verbally and then are asked to mute their microphones when they are not speaking. Remote members may leave and rejoin the proceedings. However, if a remote member depart our hearing for a short while for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave their video function on. If members will be absent for a significant period or depart to join different proceedings, they should exit the software platform entirely, then rejoin it when they return. Members may use the software platform chat feature to communicate with staff regarding only technical or logistical issues. I have designated a committee staff member to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphone to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceedings. With that, I'd like to welcome our panel witnesses for taking the time to come before us to discuss the Army's current and future tactical wheeled vehicles. Mr. Tim Gaudette, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition and Policy Logistics, and who, until just this month, was a PEO of Combat Support, Combat Services Support at the Detroit procurement programs. Welcome. And Mr. Michael Cadeau, Director of Ground Vehicles Systems Center, that is our Science and Technology Laboratory for combat and tactical vehicles. As I mentioned earlier, the truck and utility vehicles, particularly those necessary to support field operations, are essential to the success of any modern military. We've all seen the pattern of the increasing risk in the Army's management of these vehicles over the last few years by cutting modernization and production funding to generate more money for the higher priority weapons programs, the 31-4 piece that the Army has been going through night court for several years. We look forward to the witnesses addressing this increased risk and its implementations for truck and utility fleets today. We will also talk about risk to our industrial network, incredibly important, especially when we start talking about minimum sustaining rates. We've also noted over the last couple of months increased public awareness and interest in accelerating pace and scope of electrification. This is certainly nothing new to the automotive industry, but the military applications of electrification, particularly in the field environment, has very different challenges. Our witnesses today will help us understand the Army's been and where it's going for tactical wheeled vehicles. More importantly, they'll help us understand and the operational technical challenges that make the commitment to vehicle electrification perhaps uncertain at best at this time. With this, I want to recognize the stand-in for our ranking member, Mrs. Hartzler, Mr. Don Bacon from Nebraska, for his opening statement. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the spirit in which you lead this subcommittee, and I'm grateful to you. I appreciate your leadership in holding this hearing so that we may gain a better understanding of the Army's current and future plans for its tactical wheeled vehicle programs. As we wait the delivery of the President's budget request, I'm concerned about the proposed FY22 defense top line and what that could mean for both our nation's defense, for our soldiers. In recent years, the Army's tactical wheeled vehicle programs have been funded at or below minimum sustaining rates, just as the chairman says, and have at times been used as bill payers for the Army's higher priorities. This appears to be a likely case for FY22 budget request as well. With over 200,000 tactical wheeled vehicles, we cannot afford to fall behind in recapitalization. I'm particularly interested in gaining better understanding from today's hearing of what impacts these funding and prioritization choices are having on the Army's wheeled vehicle programs. From a strategic and operational risk management perspective, I expect the witnesses to address how tactical wheeled vehicle modernization procurement fits into the Army's priorities and what they see as the most significant challenges to modernizing and sustaining a ready tactical wheeled vehicle fleet. I also want to know what strategic risks and additional future costs the Army may be imposing on the wheeled vehicle programs and the industrial base needed to produce and sustain them. As we all know, cutting plans and funding for development and procurement programs creates vendor uncertainty and a lack of predictability over time. Doing so also increases unit costs and risks the loss of industrial capacity, capability, and resilience. So I expect our witnesses today to help address these concerns. Finally, I also look forward to today's discussion on the future of electrification of combat and tactical vehicles and the Army's initial efforts to collaborate with the electrical vehicle industrial partners to explore potential options. I understand that there are some potential benefits the electrification may provide, but there are also significant integration obstacles to achieving and maintaining operational capability in the dangerous and austere environments in which these vehicles will be depended on. So I expect our witnesses to provide a realistic assessment of the potential practicality, the operational value, costs, and technical development challenges of these tactical wheeled vehicle electrification. We just want to ensure that what is fielded improves combat capability and is technically ready. So I want to thank our witnesses for testifying before us today and for all you do to support America's soldiers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. We have your statement. It's a joint statement from the two of you. But Mr. Cadet, you're recognized for opening remarks. Good to have you here.
Good afternoon, Chairman Norcroft. Chairman Norcroft, Representative Bacon, distinguished members of the Tactical Air and Land Forces Committee, on behalf of our Acting Secretary, the Honorable John E. Whitley, and our Army Chief of Staff, General James C. McConville, thank you for the opportunity to discuss Army's tactical wheeled vehicle fleet and electrification of Army vehicles, along with my colleague, Mr. Mike Cadju. I ask that our joint witness statement be entered into the record. Today, I offer my perspective based on my recent experience as a program executive officer for combat support and combat service support over the last 3 years. Today's Army tactical wheeled vehicle fleet consists of a portfolio of over 200,000 light, medium, and heavy trucks. While our vehicles rely heavily on commercial industry investments and components, they differ from commercial vehicles in 3 important areas: severe off-road mobility, crew protection, and the ability to burn JP8 or jet fuel in austere environments. In our environment of constrained resources, the Army's priority is the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, or the JLTV. We plan to buy approximately 49,000 JLTVs over the next 20 years. At that time, we will have a mixed fleet of roughly the same number of high mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, also known as Humvees. The Army's next priority is to maintain a warm production base for the family of medium tactical vehicles, or FMTV, and heavy tactical vehicle fleet. The FMTV and the HTV fleet have met their respective acquisition objective and are currently between 65 and 70% modernized. FMTV will focus on meeting the low velocity airdrop capability in our airborne community, and the heavy fleet will continue to recapitalize the oldest trucks that are approaching or exceeding their economic useful life through 2023. With the heavy fleet having reached its design maturity, the Army is exploring the concept of replacing the heavy expanded mobility tactical truck, the palletized load system, and the M915 and M1088 tractors with a common tactical truck, or CTT. The CTT would be a commercial-based truck with a modular platform that leverages the best commercial practices, new mature technologies, and the potential to shift the cost curve, saving 15 to 30%. In regards to electric vehicles, there are a number of advantages that include fewer moving parts, fuel efficiency, reduced emissions, and lower heat signatures that come with these technologies. There are a significant number of light commercial trucks in the pickup class that will be entering the market in fiscal year 2022 and 2023 timeframe. We see the light reconnaissance mission in our Scout units as a possible early opportunity to field the electric vehicle, or EV, by leveraging that development in mature commercial industry. An area of particular challenge to fielding a full electric vehicle on the battlefield is the weight of the batteries and the lack of mobile recharging capability. As a result, the initial electric vehicle solution is likely to be a hybrid drive with combustion engines and batteries due to the range and payload requirements. The Army will continue to pursue incremental solutions such as anti-idle technology, powertrain modernization, and the ability to provide off-board power to reduce the need for separate tactical power generation. In closing, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I sincerely appreciate your time today to discuss the Army's tactical wheeled vehicle fleet and opportunities for electrification. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Kiju, you're now recognized for any opening remarks.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Bacon, distinguished members of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces. Thank you for your continued support and enduring commitment to our soldiers, our civilians, and their families. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today alongside my former Army Program Executive Office counterpart, Mr. Timothy Gaudette, and to discuss vehicle electrification. I would first like to take a moment to recognize the nearly 1,800 team members that make up the Ground Vehicle Systems Center family. Like all Americans, they were personally and professionally impacted during the pandemic. However, their ability to meet the challenge continues to be an inspiration as they keep our work on track to support America's soldiers. The United States Army Combat Capabilities Development Command Ground Vehicle Systems Center, GVSC, located at the Detroit Arsenal, Michigan, is proud to serve as part of the larger Army Futures Command Team. AFC leads a continuous transformation of Army modernization in order to provide future warfighters with the concepts, capabilities, and organizational structures they need to dominate a future battlefield. At GVSC, we develop, integrate, demonstrate, and sustain the capabilities of the Army's ground vehicle systems in support of Army modernization priorities and improved Army readiness. Put simply, the GVSC team explores the art of the possible across relevant technologies, evaluates and invests in order to mature technologies that meet Army program needs, and collaborates with Army acquisition partners using soldier touch points when applicable to transition technology into programs of record. The Army's and GVSC's electrification efforts are shaped and informed by over 30 years of progressive research. Electrification to the Army represents a means to achieving many different capabilities that enhance soldiers' effectiveness in multi-domain operations. Specifically, it means the use of electric power to augment vehicle performance. Electrification-related technologies will mature and apply differently across the spectrum of light, medium, and heavy tactical wheeled vehicles, as well as the Army's combat vehicle fleet, based on each platform's unique needs and design considerations. Across the spectrum, electrification has the potential to provide the ability to operate at longer distances without refueling, extended silent watch and silent mobility through reduced acoustics and thermal signatures and improved dash speeds, additional onboard electrical power and energy storage required for advanced sensors, integrated tactical networks, and other future mission payloads, and exportable power generation and distribution. We recognize, especially from our location in the Detroit area, the significant commercial automotive focus and investments in electrification. We work closely with commercial partners to foster collaboration and leverage industry's investments in electrification technology development. While there are certainly some similarities in commercial and military requirements, we are mindful that the Army faces unique operational challenges compared to those in the commercial market. These challenges include the need to operate in extreme combat environments, widely ranging temperatures, and requirements for heavy armor and add-on mission packages. In assessing the operational usability by the military of commercially available solutions and various hybrid plug-in, and all-electric vehicles, we recognize two significant challenges: the need for a mobile and deployable recharging infrastructure and greater battery energy density and endurance. To complement commercial automotive research and investment in technology for tactical wheeled vehicles, GVSC's funding for electrification focuses on developing capabilities for combat systems with specific military unique requirements. For combat vehicles, our work is conducted under a platform electrification and mobility project, although the architecture and some of the component technologies are also applicable to tactical wheeled vehicles. GVSC's current efforts specific to wheeled vehicles focus on vehicle electrification kits, which have demonstrated up to 25% fuel savings through reduction in engine idle time for some platforms. We are continuing to pursue fuel demand reduction options like this with the Army program offices. On behalf of our Army, and especially the Ground Vehicle Systems Center team, I would like to thank the subcommittee for your continued support. Electrification offers the Army multiple operational benefits, and GVSC continues to conduct relevant, transformative research that will help bring hybrid and all-electric vehicle capabilities to the warfighter. We look forward to working with Congress to deliver the critical research, technology, and engineering that enables the Army's multi-domain transformation. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I just want to set the stage here. We have our existing structure and then in many ways the future, particularly with the electrical. You talked about, Mr. Cadet, the three major capabilities, and certainly one of those, the JP8, when we talked about. Unlike many of our other programs where industry follows what we develop, we work so closely with the existing industry and the vehicle in particular. So the health of that industry is critical to what we do. You talked about two new partners, GM and Mack, but you also talked about a warm production line. Minimum sustaining rate. Why don't you explain to us what a warm production line means to the industry? And is that across the board? Because the long-term health of those waiting or keeping a warm production line going is critical for our industrial base moving forward. So if you could explain, what do you mean when you say warm production line?
So, Chairman Norcross, I'll start by addressing what I mean by a warm industrial base. It's the fact that we do have a very strong industrial base at the component level, the engines, the transmissions, the axles. Regardless of whether we have military vehicles, those particular components are going to be producing. And that's really the heart of what we do. The importance of a warm industrial base is that if we have to surge, we have the ability to work with our vendors and react. And if we have an open contract, that makes that much easier. The second order effect of a warm production base is that because the production is requiring the sub-tier suppliers to provide parts for manufacturing, it's also providing that part base for our sustainment, those systems that have already been fielded and may need replacement parts. So the importance of a warm industrial base is really twofold. It lets us adjust in terms of production quantity, but it also allows us to sustain our systems over time.
So let me follow up that. So the minimum sustaining rate, typically for if you're building a helicopter, that's one set. Are you suggesting that that warm industrial base is kept warm because of the private sector, or that we are demanding a minimum sustaining rate so they keep that line open and moving?
Sir, sometimes it means both. Sometimes it means that the particular manufacturer that we have also produces commercial products. And so from a workforce perspective, they can ebb and flow back and forth between military and commercial. For those manufacturers that are maybe more in the military side, then the risk is a little bit higher. But I would also point out that over the last 20 or 30 years, maybe even going back further, we have manufacturers in the 90s, Freightliner, BAE, Stewart and Stevenson, to name a few, that aren't in our business today. So depending upon the requirement, depending upon the system that we're buying, I I think sometimes our manufacturers may change, but almost always our engine, axle, brakes, et cetera, our component manufacturers take advantage of that strong U.S. industrial base.
Great. Now I'll follow up with that in the second round, but I want to get to our members. Mr. Bacon, you're recognized.
Thank you there, Chairman Norcross, and thank you to both of our panelists. I've enjoyed talking to you before, and I appreciate your expertise here and your leadership. I understand that JLTV may offer utility in the special operations realm. Currently, the services have relied on the U.S. Army to select these kind of wheeled vehicle solutions, such as the Humvee, but those vehicles are aging. Has there been any interest from the special operations community in the JLTV?
So Representative Bacon, I can answer that that in fact many of the systems that we've already fielded have gone to SOCOM and the Special Forces. Of the roughly 4,000 that we fielded today, plus the other 3,000 we plan to field by the end of the year. So the answer is yes. It is truly not only a joint a program in name, but we share that particular system with our other service partners and joint partners as well.
So have the Marines also procured?
Yes, they have. In fact, it is. We have the Marine Corps as part of the program office, and the program began by the Marine Corps actually being in charge of writing the requirement, and the Army being in charge of running the program. But we actually have Marine civilians and officers as part of our program office.
Sounds like a win-win there. It's great. Now I understand that the energy efficiencies and the electrification programs are a priority. I just want to verify that we're moving at a pace that's commensurate with the testing success. Is there any, do you feel like you're being pressured at all to field any of these systems before the testing or the validation warrants?
Congressman, I don't feel any pressure at all. Basically, I think this technology has great potential, great promise. But I know one of the things that we ensure is that as we take advantage of technology, we're very conscious of the operational capability that we field. And one of the things that we pride ourselves not to do is to reduce the capability that we already have. There are some challenges, and as you've heard, the tactical wheel vehicle fleet depends very heavily on where the commercial marketplace goes, both in terms of investment and technology, as well as the components that make up our system. So I think our strategy in most cases is follow fast, if you will, and take advantage and leverage everything that the commercial industrial base is doing.
Now you both made a compelling case, I believe, in the hybrid, in that's where the technology has us at right now for fielding and maintaining our capability. One last series of questions. You know, some of the defense industry are worried, or they're relaying to me anyway, that the JLTV build to print recompete favors the incumbent, given the schedule and access to needed information and part components regarding the JLTV technical data package. So how is the Army working with industry to ensure this is a fair and open competition? I just want to provide some confidence on both sides of this compete.
Yes, no, that is a great question. What we did before we started to develop our acquisition strategy is we worked very closely with industry. We asked them, what are those areas that you're concerned about? To date, we've had multiple industry days and engagements with all of the manufacturers or potential manufacturers. We go back and forth and we share the request for proposal and all of the requirements that we have. In one case, we were going to run about an 18-month competitive effort, and industry came back to us and said that they felt that wasn't enough time. So we engaged to develop a strategy that met as many of the vendors as possible. I think yes, sir.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I'll just close with this question. So you think the current schedule is feasible for true competition?
Yes, we do. We very much believe that we have taken all the feedback from the potential field and all of the vendors that have shown interest, and we've laid out a schedule that they can meet. And we believe that the TDP itself, the technical data package that you referred to, typically a barrier to entry of competition is that the incumbent does have an advantage, but the Army has done a great job over the last 6 or 7 years ensuring that our biggest programs, the JLTV and the FMTV, which represent 80% of our fleet, 160,000 vehicles, we have bought the TDP so that the potential offerers have as much of a level playing field as we could possibly give them.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we have Carbajal, Whitman, Horsford, and Turner. Mr. Carbajal, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gaudette, we are all eagerly waiting the president's budget release tomorrow, and hopefully it means good news on many fronts. Given the likelihood of flat or nearly flat defense budgets, how important is tactical wheeled vehicle modernization and resources to the Army?
Representative Carbajal, thank you so much. We all live in constrained resources. We recognize that. I think what I would point out is when I look at the tactical wheel vehicle fleet and the 200,000 vehicles that we have, we look at the medium and the heavy fleet, and that particular fleet, there are no holes in our motor pools in our units. Our units have the trucks, and 65 to 70% of them are modernized. When we look at the light tactical fleet, that's not quite the case. While we have the vehicles in the motor pool, as we experienced in Iraq, in Afghanistan, we didn't necessarily have the protection we needed in the smaller vehicles. And so that's where we're putting our priority. And the reason why we've taken the time to prioritize the light fleet is because we understand there may not be resources. So when the Army looks at where the gaps are and they put a priority on the 31+4, that's because we recognize we need to fill that gap. I think trucks are in a situation where we can accept and slow down a little bit to make sure that the Army can fight as a complete team.
Thank you. Mr. Cotty, the electrical energy demands on tactical and combat vehicles have increased steadily and will continue to grow in the coming years. Both legacy and next generation ground vehicles must provide sufficient electrical power to effectively operate a variety of equipment and payloads, including electronic warfare systems, active protection systems, radios, and directed energy weapons, just to name a few. I understand that currently onboard vehicle power can be supplemented using auxiliary power units, but that existing APUs are so large and heavy that they can be difficult to integrate with many vehicles, which must stay below certain size and weight thresholds. How is the Army working to address these power generation needs with solutions that present an acceptable size and weight footprint?
Congressman Carbajal, absolutely, we do see those integration challenges for those auxiliary power units. And as we look towards electrification, that's really where we see the operational benefits of creating that onboard power to power those advanced warfighting functions, counter UAS systems, directed energy weapons, those items that are using lasers, microwave systems. That's really where we're seeing the push towards electrification is to achieve those operational benefits. And to that end, we are closely working with partners across our Army Futures Command team, as well as the Program Executive Office and Mr. Gaudette and his team, to identify what components of electrification can we take advantage of today and closely follow commercial industry. And when the technology, especially in the hybrid and plug-in hybrid space, is available and it's affordable and it's mature, and we can integrate it onto our systems, be in a position to do so. We certainly see there's some capability that's available today to reduce fuel consumption, as well as to increase some available power. And as the investments in industry continue to occur over this decade and next, ensuring that those systems, we monitor them, we communicate with industry on what our gaps are, how those gaps align to their investment, and then we make sure that they're ruggedized and they can support our systems. That's our strategy to achieve the challenge that you described.
Thank you. Mr. Gadet, commercial companies with large fleets of trucks of all sizes routinely buy customizable solutions from vehicle manufacturers rather than custom-made vehicles. Why doesn't the Army procure commercialized commercial truck variants as opposed to custom-built vehicles like the JLTV or FMTV? What would be the cost difference from the current plan to procure custom-made vehicles rather than purchasing customizable vehicles?
Yeah, so I think Congressman Carbajal, it comes down to looking at the requirement. And in some cases, when I talked about our military vehicles have a different requirement for mobility, payload, and protection. On the JLTV, there are no like items available in the commercial marketplace, which is why we buy the technical data package to compete, so that we can continue to give those capabilities to the soldier. As you move into the heavy tactical vehicle fleet, those more align with the commercial like programs, a line haul tractor that you might see going up and down the road with UPS. And so then that's where the situation where the Army can add an armor cab to it, or we can do something with the tires that make it a little bit more off-road mobile. And that's where we would want to target an opportunity to use commercial, is when the requirements look more like the commercial industry.
Thank you. I'm out of time, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Whitman, you are recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Mr. Cadieux, I'd like to start with you. Listen, I appreciate the great work that's going on at the Ground Vehicle Systems Center. You know, we normally see military technology driving technology on the civilian side. This is actually one of those times where it's the opposite. We see technology that's been developed on the civilian side with electric vehicles now being looked at on the military side. I wanted to ask this. If you look at electric vehicles, it does appear that they have a potential role in a first strike capability, but we all know that our adversaries are going to look at what happens in sustainment, and we know that there are vulnerabilities tactically for those vehicles in sustaining them, that is, recharging them, the power necessary in order to be able to do that. Let me ask you, do you see that the vehicles have more than just a limitation of use for sort of a in the rear with the gear sort of capability? And are there considerations that are given to what kind of percentage of combination in the fleet that we would have with internal combustion engines versus electric vehicles versus hybrid vehicles?
We certainly see a role actually across the entire spectrum for electrification, both in tactical wheeled vehicles as well as combat systems. And as we look at what commercial industry is doing today and where they're headed, and then as we look and close those gaps and integrate them onto our systems, we see the opportunities to increase. So right now and today, and actually it's an effort that Mr. Gadet is actively working today, is an electronic electric light reconnaissance vehicle. And that's a specialty niche kind of activity where we see capability perhaps today. And then as the maturity of those systems occur over time, especially as we close gaps on the combat systems, and that will take a while, we see opportunity to leverage that again across that entire spectrum, and not necessarily behind, if you will, but really right into the deep fight. Sure. To your point, there's several challenges that we need to overcome.
Sure.
How do we do mobile recharging and an infrastructure to support that as one example?
Very good. Well, listen, I appreciate your thoughtfulness in that, and I want to follow up, Mr. Cadieux, with that. You know, I do see a world where these electric vehicles can complement our fleet, but I'm not sure that we're at a point where the internal combustion engine doesn't serve an outsized combat role. And as you point out, some of the limitations, namely the size and weight of batteries, the inherently unstable nature of lithium-ion batteries. We all know the ability to be able to control the heating of those, especially if they're quickly discharged, which we know in combat situations many times may be the situation. And also, as we both pointed out, charging in the field does become an issue. So realistically, how far out do you think we are from having an electric vehicle in the field that has overcome all of these technical hurdles? Understand that it can be a complement, and I think there are specific roles for electric vehicles, but how far off in the future do you think a scaled implementation of these vehicles might occur?
From a technology perspective, and especially when we think about hybrid or hybrid plug-in, we suspect the commercial industry technology will begin to mature within this decade, and we can start to leverage and truly integrate it onto some of our platforms. In terms of an all-electric platform and the ability to overcome and close all of the gaps that were discussed a moment ago, we more than likely would see the technology being mature in the next decade, not necessarily in this one.
Gotcha. Give me a little more of your perspective on hybrid technology. That to me seems to have the greatest potential to provide the greatest capability in the field, and does give you the ability to overcome some of the tactical hurdles, but also give you some flexibility that I think can be to our tactical advantage also. So kind of give me your perspective on how you see the development of hybrid technology in the development of combat vehicles.
So as we look at electrification components, we see some technology that's available very soon, such as anti-idle technology on our systems. Tim Gadet and ourselves have been partnered to look at the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle and anti-idle technology. So that way, and it's similar to my vehicle, when I'm at a stoplight, my engine shuts off. When I'm ready to go and that light turns green, it turns back on. The application of that, but it's in a much greater impact because we idle a lot with our vehicles. And we start to see some significant fuel savings, 25% in some cases, when we do that and apply some of those technologies. Those are very near in terms of maturity today. When we start to think of hybrid, where we have maybe a larger battery packs and a smaller internal combustion engine, we certainly see some capability there as well. An area that we just noted is we took delivery of robotic combat vehicle lights, prototype systems. And in those instances, we see a hybrid package there, where you have a larger battery pack coupled with a smaller internal combustion engine.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Cadu. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And we're also talking about things of issues. How does EMP affect the electrical vehicle? Very important. Mr. Horsford, welcome to the subcommittee. Good to have you here. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm excited to be joining as the newest member on HASC, and very delighted to be a part of this subcommittee on tactical air and land forces. Just by way of introduction, I have Nellis and Creech Air Force bases in my district, as well as the Nevada Test and Training Range and the Hawthorne Army Depot, all located in my district. So this is a very important committee, a subcommittee for the work of our military constituency and everything that they do each and every day. I also want to thank our witnesses today, and obviously right now I'm listening and learning more than anything, and I really appreciate your expertise and insight on the Army's tactical wheeled vehicle program. I'll just ask if I could, Mr. Gadet and Mr. Cadu, the Nevada Army Guard recently took steps to revamp the training program for its drivers so that vehicle operators can be more prepared for future combat missions. This is taking place simultaneously with the state's effort to optimize the maintenance plan for the Nevada's approximately 1,500 ground vehicles and reduce maintenance expenditures. As you may know, Nevada Guard vehicles have not been transported or driven in a combat area in more than a decade. So I'm aware the Army resumed product verification testing for the last variant of its family of medium tactical vehicles. But can you bring me up to speed and provide a status update on where the Army is with the testing of FMTVs, please?
Congressman Horsford, I'd be glad to talk about that. We, as you know, we use the term family of tactical wheel vehicles, the FMTV. In 2018, we awarded a new competitive contract, which resulted in a much more capable system. So our systems are getting better over time. As we brought that vehicle to test, we started the reliability testing, and we got about 1/3 of the way into the test, and we were seeing results that led us to believe that we weren't on the proper reliability growth curve to get to where we needed to be. So I decided to stop that test. We went back and talked to our vendor, and the vendor made all the necessary fixes, brought it back to their own facility to test, and then recently here in the January-February timeframe, that they returned the vehicles to the Army so we could do our own independent testing. That's going extremely well. They've made a huge difference compared to where they were about a year ago, and we're very confident that they're on the right path.
Thank you. And also, the Army apparently plans to keep its tactical wheeled vehicles in the fleet for 30 or more years, and it buys these vehicles over an extended period, which leads to concerns about obsolescence in the fleet and difficulties in manufacturing as suppliers struggle to provide vehicles and parts that are out of sync with the commercial market. So what strategies will the Army pursue to help solve this problem? And why are manufacturers in some cases not interested in producing military vehicles? And what can be done to address the issue of sole source over competitive bid process? Thank you.
Congressman Horsford, three very good questions. In terms of the 30 years, what we do is we work with our producers, our manufacturers, when we have issues with a certain supplier that we think may not be able to produce anymore. We also buy when we think we're going to buy for the life cycle, and we stock those critical parts. And then we're also getting into advanced manufacturing and using our organic industrial base to be able to do that. In terms of the sole source question, as I mentioned before, we buy the technical data package so that we can improve competition, and we think we're made great progress in doing that. And the biggest barrier to the manufacturer is usually volume. When most of the auto manufacturers you think about, they make hundreds of thousands of vehicles a year, and on average we buy maybe 3,000, maybe 4,000 vehicles a year. So I would say that's probably the biggest barrier to getting the more traditional manufacturers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I understand Mr. Turner is no longer here, so Mr. Green, you're recognized for 5 minutes. I just saw him. There you are. You're still muted.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
You're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here. Really appreciate both the chairman and the ranking member for their leadership on this issue, and I certainly appreciate our witnesses and their lives of service to the country. And I, of course, am very appreciative of cutting-edge technology. I get enamored with it, just the next gadget that comes out. Clearly, the private sector is making some big transitions to electric, and I'm excited about that too. I like everybody else, I think CO2 is an issue, and we got to decrease both its production and find a way to get rid of it. But just because something's new and exciting doesn't necessarily mean it's the right choice for our war fighters, because in the end, it's about them having the very best thing to fight with, piece of equipment, and having of course, deployed myself to combat. And I came in the Army, it was and I don't even know if our witnesses will remember the Gamma Goat, or clearly the M113, which is still, an armored vehicle, but in the inventory. But the Gamma Goat and the CJ7 were actually in the inventory when I came in the Army back in 1982. So been around and seen a lot of transition myself. My big concern with the electric vehicles is, like, a lot has already been discussed, but something as a physician that hasn't been raised is toxicity. And I'd like to hear from you guys as y'all contemplate batteries. what are we doing to, address the toxicity to soldiers if, some of the equipment that are in these batteries is, aerosolized in an explosion, in a fire or whatever? Are we preparing for that as we prepare to deploy these things?
Congressman Green, so from a technical perspective, a couple of thoughts. First, we have extensive partnerships with the Department of Energy and their national labs as they work and really look at battery research and battery storage that includes safety. And how do we do it smartly, to your point of toxicity, and ensure that it's a safe system. Additionally, we have efforts underway ourselves over the last 5 years where we've been looking to say, how do we ensure that we have safety testing standards for these systems, especially when we start to put these capabilities and they are transported on Navy ships or aircraft, to ensure that they're safe. Because to your point, if they catch on fire, it's very hard, right? How do we ensure that we extinguish it? And how can you? And so we put a lot of effort towards how do we ensure we have standardized testing, so as these batteries come online, we can each time test them to ensure that they are safe. Those are the areas that we've been spending some of our effort.
I appreciate you guys saying that, but on the medical side of the military, we oftentimes have physicians that are, an OB doc winds up in a flight surgeon's position and he's downrange, and does that individual understand, I'm an ER physician, so I got extensive training in toxicology. We just have to make sure that we're prepared for that. One of the other questions I have, and I'm shifting gears a little bit because I'm probably only going to get a chance for one more question, is a lot of rare earth metals find themselves in these electronic systems, and the vast majority of the rare earth metals, we're getting them from China. So, what's our plan if we're going to rely on these batteries? What's our plan for rare earth metals and the other things that go into the batteries and the systems that support them?
You're absolutely correct. And one of the concerns that or in the factors that we've been looking at is especially in the case of rare earth magnets. That's something that is present in a lot of the electric motors. And so that is certainly a concern. The other concern that we also have is looking at lithium ion battery production domestically. And is that going to be available when necessary, especially when industry scales and when we can take advantage of it in the future as well, ensuring that we have that capability here.
So you guys are taking that into consideration as you look to develop these systems?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's real important. It'd be great next time we talk to maybe get a little more detail on what the plan is. Mr. Chairman, I think I'm out of time. I yield. Thank you for letting me.
Absolutely. Mr. Brown, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going from Mr. Green to Mr. Brown, I appreciate it. I'm going to pick up where he left off. And first of all, thank him for really honing in on safety aspects of, kind of pivoting, converting, transitioning to electric powered vehicles. I think it's really important. And Mr. Cadeau, on the battery related research, and you just recently mentioned kind of a partnership with the DOE. Can you just flesh it out in as much detail as you can? Like, what is the trend line for the Army budget when it comes to research, development on battery capacity, safety? What are the relationships with our research universities and with private industry? And kind of be as specific as possible. I just want to get a feel for how comprehensive the effort is of the Army to develop the kinds of batteries that are safe. They have the capacity. They can withstand the rigor of the battlefield. Can you talk in detail about that R&D program?
Absolutely, and thank you, Congressman Brown, for that question. Two activities, significant activities that I would like to point to first. Well, the first one is the Advanced Vehicle Power Technology Alliance. What that is that's a co-led activity between our center and the Department of Energy that allows us to co-invest and partner with industry and academic institutes. And I can share a lot more details with you on that. The other one I'd like to point out to as well, though, is our Automotive Research Center. The Automotive Research Center is really our flagship activity where we partner with the University of Michigan and 8 other premier institutes, 3 DOE national labs, as well as over 20 automotive industry partners. And they are all about doing the basic research with significant lines of effort into battery and battery technology and doing the modeling and simulation and analysis to ensure that, frankly, we get it right, we get it safe, and it's reliable over time. Those are 2 primary efforts that we are leveraging that hit universities, industry, as well as government partners.
And how would you characterize the trend line of the Army's budget that goes into battery-related research and development?
For the Ground Vehicle Systems Center, from which I can speak to, over the last 5 years, we've spent $75 million roughly in battery or electrification-related technology across 5 lines of effort.
Yeah, what's the trend line though? 75 million, is it up, down, or flat?
I'd have to take that for a question of the record to really understand that, sir.
Okay, I appreciate that. Mr. Gadet, a question for you. And I thank our committee staff for teeing this question up for me. The tactical wheeled vehicle, my understanding is that there is a acquisition strategy that was produced in 2014 and that the Army is currently working on an updated comprehensive strategy. Is that accurate?
Congressman Brown, that is accurate. We had an original one in 2010, followed by the 2014. Right now, the Army is looking at a tactical vehicle plan based on multi-domain operations. So another element of the Army is studying the effects of how we're going to fight in the future against the systems that we have today versus the mix and quantity that we might need in the future. And that's been going on for about a year, and I believe the emerging results are being briefed out here shortly.
Okay, because you mentioned 2010, 2014. I think you mentioned 2000. What's the status of the strategy, and when are you going to release it?
Yeah, sir, I believe the emerging results of the plan are being briefed out internally to the Army now. And once the Army plan has been briefed out, then we'll start to develop the strategy. So I wouldn't expect a strategy this year in FY21, but sometime next year, probably.
Yeah, a great former Secretary of Defense once said, without a strategy, then you may be throwing good money after bad money. So let's come up with a strategy and make sure that Congress can get a good look at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Cayley, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
All right. Mahalo, Mr. Chair, and aloha, everyone from Hawaii. Thank you so much for having this hearing today. I have 2 questions. One is for Mr. Cadeau. How are based on what the testimony, how are battery-related science and technology research efforts being factored into the Army's approach to electrification? And what Army and industry initiatives, if any, are showing considerable potential or promise?
As we look at our tactical wheeled vehicle fleet and the technology and the electrification technologies, by and large, we look to leverage the investment that commercial industry is making, recognizing that battery and battery energy density is critical in order to effectively integrate and provide operational value for our systems. So to that end, we've done significant partnerships and creating electrification forums where we're bringing dozens of industry partners together across the country so they can share with us where they're at. And then we are able to express, here's the conditions by which our systems operate in. And we can have that dialogue. So we have awareness of where we believe industry will be meeting our needs and where those gaps then remain. In the case of a gap, then what we will look at is we will partner, whether it be with additional industry partners, universities, or non-traditional entities as well. One particular area that is interesting and exciting to us is a cooperative research and development agreement with the University of Maryland that is looking at solid state battery technology. And that's something that has us interested as we move forward.
Yeah, I saw a news report this morning. One of America's largest vehicle manufacturers is expecting a 40% increase over the next 10 years in electric vehicles and electric trucks. And so I think this is a step in the right direction, and partnering with those industry leaders and the sharing of critical information as the technology is developed, I think is very important. So thank you for that. Second question for Mr. Gadet. The Army apparently plans to keep its tactical wheeled vehicles, in the fleet for 30 or more years, and buys these over, as you well know, an extended period. This can lead to an obsolete fleet and difficulties in manufacturing parts and the supply chain as they struggle to provide vehicles and parts that are out of sync with the commercial market. Can you maybe talk to a little bit about what the Army's future plans will be for the maintenance of the fleet over this extended period of time, and especially as it relates to replacement parts and maintenance, and how we're planning the O&M component of the tactical wheeled fleet?
I'd be glad to, Congressman. We do keep our vehicles for a very long time, 30 years, but because of the quantity, the over 200,000 tactical wheel vehicles that we have, we tend to be in production for a very long time too. So the first area that helps us in the sustainment is if we're in production, then our manufacturers maintain relationships with the second, third, and fourth tier suppliers. And when somebody decides not to make a part, they find an alternative source. When we go out of production, oftentimes we'll do what's called a lifetime buy, where we recognize there's a critical component, and then we buy enough of those to take us through what we think will be the rest of the life of that system. And I think the third one that is newer, but one that we're putting energy into, is advanced manufacturing in our own organic industrial base, where they have the ability that if we have the technical data, we can actually use that technology to produce the part with our organic capability. So a combination of those three is how we address that issue.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Gadet. Mahalo, Chair, for the opportunity, and I'll yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Visi, are you with us? You're recognized. Mark? All right. Is there anyone else that we haven't recognized for the first round? And if Mark comes back on, I'll yield to him. So for those of you who want a question for the second round, I'm going to start by following up on that next generation. I mentioned EMP, those pulses that we are looking throughout our services and our programs, the vulnerabilities. Gee, electric vehicles seem to be a place. Have you looked into those potential issues that might come up? EMP, people think of the nuclear blast, but there are other ways to disrupt the electrical. How have you calculated those issues into your research so far?
As we're working with industry and we're looking at where we have gaps, we're looking at it from a whole perspective of where are the vulnerabilities. Chairman, to your point, EMP. Another that comes to mind is cyber, and how do we protect against cyber security threats as well. So as we work with these vendors and we try to understand, we have robust testing, and we look and we start to say, what are the requirements that are necessary? And we have to do that up front. And then if we see those gaps, that's where we have deliberate activities to try to close those gaps. And in some cases, we see that there's certainly an overlap with industry and where industry needs to go. Certainly from a cybersecurity perspective, they care about that as well. And then for those that remain, we ensure that we are partnering and leveraging the mechanisms that we have to engage with universities and research institutes to close the remainder of the gaps that we have.
So electric vehicles, no pun intended, is a hot item out there in the commercial world. And so we get many questions. Are we going to look at our fleet? And you've discussed much of that today. But just because it's available doesn't make it right, particularly for the tactical side of that. You talked about being quiet. the power, the heat signature, that burst power. But also when we start building those requirements and the way they are right now, I would say that there's quite a gap in those requirements. You talked about over the next decade that changing. What is the primary area of concern in those requirements? Is it the battery weight, size, availability when everybody wants as it wants? You know, could you address those major concerns?
Chairman,
Go ahead, Mike.
go ahead. The first concern that we see is battery energy density, ensuring that the batteries have enough energy and then can fit and integrate onto our systems. And that problem becomes amplified as the weight of our vehicles on the lighter end, it's easier, and that problem gets worse over time. The other is the environmentals. We have to operate in extremely high temperatures in the desert down to the Arctic. And then we have to have components and we wrap them in that have to operate in that environment. And then as we wrap them into armor and integrate them into very tight systems, how do we keep them cool? How do we ensure that those electronics also work in very high temperatures? Those are the two that jump right to mind in terms of the challenges that we have.
Thank you. We'll go to Don Bacon and then Mark, I'll flip it over to you, all right?
Thank you there, Mr. Chair. Two follow-ups. I heard yesterday, researching this on electrification, if you go with a full battery for these vehicles, can you tell us the amount of added weight they'll be putting on these devices? If you give us a little background on that, I think it's useful to have that on the record. Thank you.
Yeah, Congressman Bacon, I'd be glad to. The example I guess I would use is, as Mike mentioned, it's easier on the light vehicle. So I'll start with the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. That has right now a capability of 350 miles of range so that our soldiers, sailors, and Marines can do their mission. And it's got about 5,000 pounds of payload. If we were to take that range and the energy needed, we would need about 10,000 pounds of batteries. And we only have 5,000 pounds of payload. So if I took half of that and put all the payload with batteries, I'd cut my range in half to 175, but I'd have no payload left. And so that weight that you mentioned is significant. The other little fact is that 1 gallon of fuel weighs about 8 pounds. That would equate to about 140 pounds of batteries.
I appreciate that because that's a compelling background. And I think that's why you're going to the hybrid. That makes sense because we have the technology now where you can maximize the capabilities of electrification now and still maintain your combat capability. My second question is, I served 4 tours in the Middle East myself and had to live through the explosively formed penetrator and all these IEDs that the Iranians pumped over into Iraq, as well as Afghanistan. Your new vehicle, as well as it been looked at from that perspective, hardening for these kind of munitions? Because we had to do that with the Humvee, with our follow-on there, with the, also got a brain freeze, but the vehicle that we had to put in to help secure our troops better.
Congressman Bacon, you're talking about the MRAP was the vehicle that we had to respond to. And quite frankly, that's why JLTV is our top priority in the Army. Okay. Is because we recognize that particular capability was needed. The MRAP did exactly that. It provided the protection, but we lost the mobility and we lost the payload. So the JLTV was an attempt to rebalance those 3 military requirements.
Fantastic.
And so we believe that that's the biggest area that we need to focus on, which is why JLTV is the Army's #1 priority in TWV.
Okay. That makes sense. I didn't understand that a lot of those requirements came right out of the EFP and the IED scenario. So thank you. Mr. Chair, yield back. Those are all my questions.
I think we lost the chairman.
Hey, Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
I'm here. Mark, you're recognized.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Cadet, your example of the payload and the weight reminds me of the stories in school we used to hear about the computers that used to take up an entire room, and now they nicely fit in our hands in many cases. And as this technology evolves, it will be very interesting to see how the Army utilizes it. Given the likelihood, and this is for Mr. Cadet, given the likelihood of constrained budgets and competing priorities, I'm concerned about how our tactical wheeled vehicle fleets will remain relevant in a future fight against a near-peer competitor without many long-term modernization efforts. I'm very interested in hearing about what the Army's near and long-term plans are for the high mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles and that fleet, since it's going to continue to be in service for quite some time. Have you considered the potential of modifying existing unarmored HMM VWs to an all-electric configuration?
So that's a very good question. Consistent with where we are with modernization, the medium and the heavy fleets are in pretty good shape. They are 65 to 75% modern. As the light fleet, that is the area that we're focused on, and why we're going after replacing as many Humvees as possible with the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, because it does have protection. It has superior off-road mobility and superior safety as well. We are starting to look at those opportunities where electrification, whether it be a hybrid solution, may be able to be modified on our existing vehicles. But we're just starting to look at that based on the maturity of the technology and the crossover into our more austere, ruggedized needs. There would be a degree of integration and ruggedization to make that technology applicable to our military vehicles.
For traditional internal combustible vehicles or engines that the Army currently uses, does the military refine their own fuel, or do they get their fuel? They do refine their own.
So, Congressman, what we do, our military vehicles have a unique requirement, unlike the commercial vehicles, to burn JP8, which is jet fuel, and that's primarily because we fight on the same in the same areas as our Air Force partners, who use a significant amount of fuel, and the Army is responsible for providing fuel for the Department of Defense. So therefore, we've come up with a policy, a single fuel on the battlefield, which requires us to work with our engine manufacturers to modify engines so they can burn the jet fuel.
Because you're already doing that, do you think that that the military would need their own mines in order to be able to replenish batteries for all electric vehicles in the future? Would they need to be able to source their own materials to build their own batteries, or do you think that the batteries would just be part of the supply chain?
So we tend to follow the commercial investment. Okay. The amount of money that our commercial automotive industry is putting into many technologies, not just batteries, oftentimes dwarfs the amount of money that we have. And so we try to follow fast. We try to make sure that those technologies are matured and ready, and then we integrate them into our more unique platforms.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Whitman, do you have another question for us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go to Mr. Gadet and ask a question about the tactical elements of electric vehicles and the sustainment of them. Listen, I think that there's capability with those vehicles. The question becomes tactical vulnerabilities. As you look at an internal combustion engine, when you are transporting fuel around it, as you said, using jet fuel creates a dual utility or a multi-utility for that fuel. And the refueling operation for an internal combustion engine can take place pretty quickly. Even on the biggest of vehicles there, refueling opportunity is fairly short. Not the same for electric vehicles. And as we know, if you have a vehicle that stays in one spot for an elongated period of time, or your adversary knows that it's going to be there for an extended period of time, it makes their calculus for tactical advantage much, much easier. Can you speak to any of the tactics? We talk about the technology side, but you also, I think, have to look at the tactics side. Are there any elements of tactics? And Mr. Cadu, I would point to you too. Any thoughts on the tactical elements of electric vehicles and what that challenges that poses to the Army?
Yeah. So Mike, let me just start with maybe a 20-second answer, which is that the amount of time it would take to charge that JLTV that I mentioned earlier is probably around 10 minutes for fuel, and it could be in excess of about 2 hours right now in one location to refuel or recharge, if we even had a recharging capability that was mobile, not fixed, as we would see here in the United States.
Additionally, within the Army Futures Command and leveraging multiple activities, we've been pursuing soldier touch points. And so getting that soldier feedback. And so that soldier feedback is key. And in this particular case, the Army Applications Lab, which is an AFC component, recently engaged with 6 industry partners that have unique capability that have some promise for mobile and tactical recharging. And as they work through their process, we're going to get soldier feedback. And that soldier feedback will go a long way to informing the tactics, as you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah, listen, those are great observations. I think, looking at the full battlefield scenarios, listen, I think mobility is critically important. If you can move, you obviously lessen the risk there on the battlefield. The challenge then, though, is a complex one by moving whether it's a stored energy vehicle to transfer power to a battery pack on another vehicle, or whether it's a power generation facility that's actually generating power through a generator to transfer. When you put that on the move as well as the vehicle, as you know, the complexity increases significantly. While it does reduce the vulnerability, the physics of doing that and keeping both those systems functional also gets a little more complicated, especially if you're in very, very challenged environments. Maybe you'd have some tactical limitations as far as roadways or terrain, those sorts of things. So just as you point out, I think it's incredibly important to get out there with the soldiers on the ground. As you know, I think the most compelling and thoughtful, insightful observations don't necessarily come from people up in the acquisition chain. They come from soldiers that'll tell you, sir, this won't work, or sir, have you thought of this? Or, we can do these things, but we can't do those things. So I think that's incredibly important. I applaud you for doing that, because that practical knowledge of what our junior enlisted, our senior enlisted, as well as our junior officers who are going to have to deal with this, their observations, I think, are going to be critical going forward. So thank you for doing that. I think that will fully inform the pathway forward for electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now with that, I yield back.
And Mr. Whitman, you know a little bit about the electric ships, right? They used to be underwater with all batteries, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes.
And you
Yes.
want to get them wet.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Mr. Horsford, you're recognized for the second round. Steve, you're recognized for another round. Do you need? You good? Okay. Mr. Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, follow up on batteries prompted by that last exchange with Representative Whitman. Are we looking at battery replacement technology versus battery charging? I know that there's an Israeli company that has been working on that technology. The idea, a vehicle pulls into a station, they drop a battery, they put another battery in, and off they go. Certainly, there's logistical requirements there as well, additional batteries and stuff like that. But in terms of like time on station in a tactical refueling setting, et cetera, that technology, I think, would probably provide greater survivability for units. Is battery replacement something that's on the radar?
As we're looking at the technologies from our perspective, everything's on the table to include the scenario that you just outlined, Congressman Brown.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Uh, Mr. Cahaley, you can wrap us up the second round. Do you have a question?
Sure, why not, Chair? You know, always get like a chance to ask second question. And this would be a broad one for the Army, and I guess it would be can be directed to either Mr. Gadet or Mr. Cadeau. But this has to do with you know, as we have this broad discussion about increasingly looking at the military electrifying its fleet, its tactical fleet. Do you have any thoughts on whether or not, or how the DoD would be reassessing its long-term fuel storage? Obviously, fuel is a big deal for our current fleet, and as we electrify that fleet, is there any thoughts on what the DoD would be doing in terms of fuel storage? You know, we all saw how, you know, the oil or the industry was affected, you know, in the last few weeks, and so as the world moves towards clean and renewable energy, and the DoD invests in the electrification of our tactical fleet, do you think that large fuel storage facilities might become obsolete in our military and at our DoD facilities? For me, this is significant in Hawaii because you know, we only have so much room here. We have a lot of military bases, and so I'm thinking about the future bases and fuel storage, and if the Army would be cutting back on its fossil fuel consumption in the future as we electrify the fleet.
So Congressman Cahaley, I would just take it probably that question for record, because from my perspective, my charter kind of sits in buying tactical wheeled vehicles, which is for those units that would deploy into a theater. And the part that I think you're mentioning is more on the installation side of the house, supporting a lot of the non-tactical vehicles and some of the military vehicles as well. But from a storage perspective, on a tactical battlefield, we tend to store in blivets and other things that, based on where we have to do the power generation to recharge batteries, would determine how we might change our doctrine. But I think your question was probably related to the installation side of the house, and we could take that for record.
Yeah, that sounds great. It was just a broad question as we you know, have this discussion. But thanks for giving it a shot. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
So, for those of you who haven't seen his unique storage ability out in Hawaii, next time you're out there, remarkable what they have up in the mountains. With that, Mr. Bacon, any last words?
No, Mr. Chair, appreciate both panelists, and I appreciated talking to them earlier as well. They did a great job. Thank you.
So we appreciate it. It was a great discussion. Obviously, you're keeping your eye on the ball in the future, but more importantly, you're making sure we get there where we are now. We appreciate your time and your service to this country. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
All right.